الحمد لله وكفى والصلاة والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى خصوصا على أفضلهم وخاتم النبيين محمد الأمين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين وبعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا لا تتخذوا اليهود والنصارى أولياء بعضهم أولياء بعض ومن يتوله منكم فإنه منهم إن الله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين صدق الله العظيم. We begin with Allah's blessed name. We praise Him and we glorify Him as He ought to be praised and glorified. And we pray for peace and for blessings on all His noble messengers, and in particular on the last of them all, the blessed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam. As we greet you tonight here in Masjid al-Falah in Subang Jaya in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, as we attempt to address the subject which has become critically important now, the Zionist attack on Syria. Two things have happened over the last few days which have a significant link with this subject. Number one, the assassination of the scholar of Islam, Sheikh Muhammad Saeed Ramadan al-Bhuti, rahimahullah, who is now shaheed. And the second is the Israeli apology to the Turkish government and Turkish people for the attack on the flotilla to Gaza 3 years ago, which took the lives of 7 Turkish citizens. We pray for Allah's mercy and forgiveness on the soul of the Sheikh, who was 84 years of age, who was a learned scholar and a distinguished scholar of Islam. And we say, may Allah grant him Jannatul Firdaus. Ameen. And we say shame. Shame on those who planned the attack, which took the life of not only the learned Sheikh, who was innocent of any wrongdoing that could justify such an attack, and which also took the lives of some 40 other people, 40-something other people, who are now all shuhada. This attack took place in the house of Allah, the masjid. And it is a taste of things to come in Syria. That although we dislike it, we're going to have to barricade the masajid now against such people. This is mentioned in the hadith of what's going to happen. That when Dajjal is outside the masjid in Damascus, and Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam is inside the masjid, and the salat is about to commence, Nabi Isa alayhi salam will come down, descend from the sky with his hands resting on the wings of 2 angels. And Imam al-Mahdi would recognize him and say, this is the son of Maryam alayhi salam. and invite him to lead the salat. And he'll say, no, their people have appointed you as the Imam, you lead. And he would pray with us in accordance with the Sharia, which was sent down to Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wassalam. And after the salat is over, he will say, open the gates of the masjid, indicating that the masjid was barricaded for protection. And as the gates are open, he will exit from the masjid and Dajjal will see him. And when Dajjal sees him, he'll become so scared, he'll melt like salt melts in water, said the Prophet ﷺ, and flee. I mention this hadith to indicate to you what lies ahead now. That although we hate to do it, the houses of Allah will now have to show some response to what was done to Sheikh al-Bouti. This was an act of munkar, something which is evil. And Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam has said that if you see something which is munkar, you must respond to it with your hand. And if you cannot do it, then with your tongue. And if you cannot change it with your tongue, then with your heart. So those who listen to this lecture and who in their hearts were glad and happy of what happened to the Sheikh and approved of it, you must know that you are a people with no faith at all. For this was surely munkar. And a people with no faith at all cannot wage a legitimate jihad. Our comments would not be complete if we did not mention that this is trademark Zionist behavior to engage in assassinations. The Israeli Mossad has assassinated so many people, they have probably lost count now. And their methodology of assassination is that either they conceal what they have done, or worse than that, they put the blame on others. And so we will hear that it is the Syrian government with this. Well, that's nonsense. A learned and respected scholar of Islam, 84 years of age, who opposes the effort of insurrection in Syria and supports the Syrian government in its opposition to that insurrection, is a very valuable asset to the government. And so to perpetrate this deception that it is the government which did it will not be accepted. Rather, it is trademark Zionist behavior that they did 9/11 and then put the blame on Osama bin Laden and some men hiding in a cave in Afghanistan. Most American people today recognize that to be false. We have to now define what is Zionism and who are Zionists in order to address the subject of the Zionist attack on Syria. And Zionism plays an extraordinarily significant role in the affairs of the world today. A dominant role in political affairs, in economic affairs, in monetary affairs, in military affairs of the world today, even in religious affairs, in sports and entertainment. And so we do need an explanation of what is Zionism. And our preliminary remark is that if you want to get an explanation of the reality of the world today, and you want to get that from universities, it won't happen. Universities cannot explain the world today. Nor can governments do it. Nor can newspapers and radio and television do it. And it's now becoming increasingly clear and painfully clear that even the scholars of Islam are failing in explaining the reality of the world today. Only the Quran and only Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam can deliver a comprehensive and accurate explanation of the reality of the world today. And for that we need a methodology for the study of the subject. In the Quran and in the Ahadith, it is ilmu akhiru zaman more than anything else, which explains the world today. And in the Quran, which surah? Suratul Kahf. Suratul Kahf. In Malaysia you say Suratul Kahfi. Suratul Kahf of the Quran, more than any other surah of the Quran, explains the reality of the world today. Who are the Zionists? There are Christian Zionists and there are Jewish Zionists. And now, as time progresses, we even get some Arab, some Chinese, maybe a couple Malay, who are Zionists as well, Pakistani Zionists and so on. But the original are Christian and Jewish. And these Christians and Jews have come together, and this cement which has bonded them together is Zionism. Does the Quran explain this phenomenon of a Jewish-Christian Zionist alliance which today dominates the world so significantly? Yes, it does. And we have on several occasions attempted to explain this verse of the Quran. If you have heard it before and you have not gone to others to teach it to others, then do please listen to it again, because this is what you're supposed to do. بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا, O you who have faith in Allah, لا تتخذوا اليهود والنصارى أولياء. Do not take the Jews and do not take the Christians as your awliya, your friends and allies. We pause. Proper methodology is that you do not take any verse of the Quran in isolation, or any hadith in isolation to derive meaning. If you do that, you could come to the conclusion that Iblis was an angel. Well, if this Quran is not referring to all Jews and all Christians, because when we study the rest of the Quran, there are several verses which indicate that Allah could not be referring to all Jews and all Christians when He said, do not take the Jews and do not take the Christians as your friends and allies. Well then, which Jews and which Christians? The answer is to be found in the words which follow. بَعْضُهُمْ أولياء بعض. Do not take such Jews and such Christians as your friends and allies, who themselves are friends and allies of each other. And so the Quran is informing us. I would prefer to use the word anticipating, but some people have objected to that word. The Quran is informing us that a time is going to come when there's going to be a Jewish-Christian alliance. And when that Jewish-Christian alliance comes into being, you are prohibited as Muslims from maintaining friendly ties with them and being their allies. بَعْدُهُمْ أَوْلِيَاءُ بَعْضٍ. And then the verse continues to declare, وَمَنْ يَتَوَلَّهُمْ مِنْكُمْ فَإِنَّهُ مِنْهُمْ. Whosoever from amongst you turn to them with friendship and alliance now belong to them. You've lost your Islam. You now belong to them. فَإِنَّهُ مِنْهُمْ. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَهْدِي الْقَوْمَ الظَّالِمِينَ. Surely Allah does not provide guidance for a people who are wicked in conduct, who commit dhulm. That Jewish-Christian alliance has already come into being, and it is the Zionist Jewish-Christian alliance which has emerged in Europe. This is Surah Al-Ma'idah. And the Quran has now explained to us the status of Zionism and the Jewish-Christian Zionist alliance, that we are prohibited from maintaining friendly ties with them and being their allies. And by virtue of the fact that the verse ends with the words, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَهْدِي الْقَوْمَ الظَّالِمِينَ, we know that one of the meanings is that these are people whose trademark would be dhulm. They commit dhulm, acts of oppression, acts of injustice, acts of like terrorism and so on. Israel is the fruit of the Jewish-Christian Zionist alliance. Israel is a Zionist state. But the Anglo-American alliance that includes France and many other European countries is also under Zionist control. So we have Israel and we have the Anglo-American alliance, which are Zionists. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is the military arm of world Zionism. Saudi Arabia, which is a Sunni state, is today a client of the Zionists. And so to Qatar, which is a Sunni state, Sunni Muslims, and many other so-called Sunni Muslim states are clients of the Zionists, the governments. Libya is Sunni, and Sunni Libya is now under Zionist control, thanks to those who waged a misguided jihad with alliance with NATO, and with NATO's help was able to overthrow the Libyan government. And as a consequence, NATO now controls Libya, Sunni Libya. Turkey is a Sunni state, Sunni Islam. And Turkey is not only a member of NATO, Zionist NATO, but seems to be comfortable with their membership in NATO. For we hear nothing, no apology, no declaration that we are not comfortable with being a member of NATO and we intend to get out. Nothing of the sort. Turkey is in the NATO camp and therefore in the Zionist camp. But Syria is not a client of the Zionists. No. Nor was Libya a client state of the Zionists. No. And because the Zionists have an agenda, a mysterious agenda, that they want to rule the whole world. Libya was attacked and Syria is attacked today because they belong to the camp of resistance, resisting Zionist control of the world. That is a fairly simple and yet quite accurate statement. Surprise of all surprises for us who are Sunni Muslims. Iran is Shia. And we have said it again and again and again and again, that whoever declares of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu ta'ala anhu that he was a usurper, that his khilafah was not legitimate, and then compounds that to declare that Uthman Ghani radiyallahu, that Umar Farooq radiyallahu ta'ala anhu was a usurper, and that Uthman Ghani radiyallahu ta'ala anhu was a usurper. We say that you are profoundly misguided. And this is basic Shia doctrine, that these are all usurpers. And yet Shia Iran is not a Zionist client state and part of the resistance to Zionism, while so many in the Sunni world of Islam makes us ashamed of them. Why do the Zionists want to rule the world? It is Islamic eschatology which explains that fairly simple question. Ilmu akhirul zaman. The Zionists want to rule the world, and hence they attack Libya, and now they're attacking Syria. But the master target is of course Russia and then China. They want to rule the world so that they can deliver to Israel the status of ruling state in the world. And when Israel adopts that status of ruling state in the world, then a man will emerge in Israel, ruling over the state of Israel. Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam described that man to us 1400 years ago. He is, of course, a Jew, a young man, powerfully built, curls, what the Orthodox Jews have. And he will declare, I am Al-Masih, the Messiah. But he would not be the true Messiah. The true Messiah is Nabi Isa alayhi salam, the son of Maryam, the Virgin Mary. Rather, he would be Al-Masih al-Dajjal, Dajjal, the false Messiah. Dajjal meaning one who operates by deception. And the Zionists who work on behalf of Dajjal also operate by deception. The Zionists have multiple strategies for seeking to achieve rule over the whole world. And Islamic scholarship has homework to do to understand these strategies and to be able to respond to them. There is an economic strategy which the banking system operates. The World Trade Organization is part of it. There is a monetary strategy in which the International Monetary System, the International Monetary Fund, plays a significant role. The World Bank. There is a political strategy for achieving dominion over the world. And in that political strategy was the League of Nations and then the United Nations Organization. There is a military strategy in which NATO is now revealing itself as increasingly operating to eliminate all those who are resisting Dajjal or resisting Israel. At the heart of all of these strategies, economic, monetary, political, military, educational, etc., is deception. Deception is at the heart of it. We turn now to Zionism and the first Arab Spring. When the Zionists using deception, remember the Zionist movement was born about the same time that a certain person whose body was preserved for a long time was discovered. Whose body? Fir'aun. And Allah refers to it in Surah? The preservation of the body. People all over the world listening, looking at this, Come on, Subhan. Surah Yunus, وَالْيَوْمَ نُنَجِّيكَ بِبَدَنِكَ. This day we are going to preserve your physical body, badan. لِتَكُونَ لِمَنْ خَلْفَكَ آيَةً. That your physical body, when it is rediscovered, would be a sign for a people to come after you. What is the sign? I give my opinion, but you know the law. When Imran gives his opinion, you must not accept his opinion. No, unless and until you are convinced that it is correct. This is the respect I have for the intellect of the people who listen to me. Who are they who will come after? There will be a people who will live like Fir'aun lived, who will be arrogant, who will blaspheme against Allah, who will perpetrate oppression on the earth, and who will wage war on Islam. And because they lived the way he lived, they'll die the way he died. Underneath the water, he declared his fate when death was staring him. And when Nabi Isa alayhi salam returns, these will also declare their fate. وَإِن مِّنْ أَهْلِ الْكِتَابِ إِلَّا لَيُؤْمِنَنَّ بِهِ قَبْلَ مَوْتِهِ, says Allah. None of them will escape. They'll all have to declare their faith in him at that time when he returns. But it won't be of any benefit for them. They live the way he lived, they'll die the way he died and enter into the hellfire. So the Zionist movement was created about the same time when the body of Fir'aun was discovered. And then the second major event that occurred after that was the First World War. And we Muslims have not as yet done a sufficient critical study and analysis of the First World War, the events which led up to it. The first Arab Spring was part of it. When the Zionists in Britain and in France succeeded in getting Muslims, Arab, Indian, Punjabi, etc., to fight with them against the Ottoman Empire, so that they could succeed in their aim in that first Arab Spring. In regime change, for example, in many parts of the Arab world, and in liberating, quote-unquote, Jerusalem for the Jews. It was only afterwards that these Arabs realized that they were taken for a ride. because they were deceived. They were offered freedom and independence from Turkish rule. And they were told you could have your Arab Khilafah can be restored, etc. But they were deceived. And now has come the second Arab Spring. And the same thing is happening once again. That they are getting Muslims to fight for them. Arab Muslims are waging war on behalf of the Zionists, supporting the Zionists, fighting on behalf of the State of Israel, and yet convinced in their hearts that they're waging a jihad. And so history is repeating itself with the second Arab Spring. Is this a valid jihad? I recognize that there are so many amongst them in Syria today who genuinely and sincerely believe that they are fighting a legitimate jihad. And I have a duty to such people to explain to them and to do it in a nice way, that no, you are wrong, you are misguided. Hopefully that they will listen to these words. And I'm not the only one who is speaking to them. The Imam of Masjid al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, Sheikh Salahuddin al-Arabri, I think is his name, is speaking eloquently and forcefully on the subject in combating what is coming from Dr. Yusuf al-Qaradawi. If you see with only one eye, then you will be convinced, you will swallow the lie that this is a legitimate jihad. But if you see with two eyes and you're able to penetrate the reality of things, you'll recognize that no, it is not permissible to take $1 million. $1 million, that's what they're offering you, eh? $1 million to go fight in Syria? Is that the way we fight in jihad? Or do we rather say, give me a horse, give me a sword, and take care of my wife and my children? You don't have to pay me $1 million to go and fight the jihad. If you pay me $1 million, that's not a jihad, that's a Yankee jihad. And you're listening to me in Syria, and you know that what I'm speaking is the truth. A young woman wrote to me from Tunisia and said to me, my brother received 1 million Tunisian dinars to go and fight in Syria. And as he was leaving, the police caught him and brought him back to my father and handed him over. And handed over the 1 million Tunisian dinars, which is worth about 600 or 700 USD. 600,000 or 700,000 American dollars. You can buy a couple houses in Subanjaya with that. And my father took the money and locked him up in a room. And now he does not want to speak to any of us. I hope that young man will listen to my words. Surely he has this much common sense to know that you don't buy people. We're not up for sale. Not those who fight in the way of Allah in jihad. You can't buy us with $5. You can't buy us with $500. You can't buy us with $5 million because we are not up for sale. Say that to the paymasters who are spending millions and millions of dollars to buy, not mujahideen, they're buying mercenaries. to go and fight in Syria. So the young man is now locked up in a room. He doesn't want to talk to anybody. He's only reciting the Quran all the time. And the family contacted me. What can we do, Sheikh? You can't keep him locked up forever. If he insists that he wants to go in Syria and fight, and you explain to him that this is wrong, this is misguided, this is not a jihad, you can't keep him away. Let him go. But when he leaves, he will not return. You will not have any links with him after that. He's no longer a member of your family. Saudi Arabia, Libya, Qatar, Turkey are all in the Zionist camp. Is it so difficult for you to understand that? I hope you're listening to me in Syria. Saudi Arabia, Libya, now under Zionist rule, Qatar, Turkey, are all in the Zionist camp. Turkey is a member state of NATO. And these are the countries who are financing, and these are the countries who are supplying the weapons to you to go and fight. Is this a legitimate jihad, or is this a Zionist attack on Syria? Why is it so difficult for you to understand? You declare of those who oppose you and who are supporting the government of Syria in its opposition to the insurrectionists, that these are wajibul qatl, that it is legitimate for you to kill them. And you go to Syria and you kill these people. The price that you will pay for killing people for no just cause is the fire of Jahannam. If you die in the struggle, you are not shaheed. No. You go into the hellfire. And those who you kill, they are the ones who will be shuhada. And so we say, if you see with two eyes, you will recognize that this is a misguided effort. Libya, under the new regime, is sending weapons, and it is likely that high-tech weapons that the Libyan army used to have would find their way into Syria. NATO will say, we didn't send it, it came from Libya. As these high-tech weapons come into your hands and you start using them, there will be an escalation of the conflict in Syria. High-tech weapons are also going to come from Saudi Arabia and Qatar, which seem to be hell-bent, doing everything they can possibly do to bring down the regime in Syria and make Syria another Libya. Perhaps this is a fulfillment, one more time, of the prophecy of Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, and I hope you're listening to me in Syria, because you know very well that Saudi Arabia is financing and Saudi Arabia is sending weapons. And Saudi Arabia is ruled by people who came from Najd. Saudi Arabia has Hijaz and has Najd. Hijaz is to the west and Najd is to the east. Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam is in Medina. And he says, Allahumma barik lana fi Shamina wa Yamanina. Oh Allah, put blessings for us in our Sham and our Yemen. And they asked, what about Najd? 3 times. And he said, from Najd, pointing in the direction of Najd, he says, from there would be the horns of shaitan, qarn of shaitan, and tribulations. And the rulers of Saudi Arabia today, the Saudi Wahhabi rulers of Saudi Arabia, are Najdi. He pointed to the east and he said, from there will come qarn of shaitan, the horns of Satan. And so I ask of you, who say that you are waging a legitimate jihad in Syria today, can the horns of Satan be part of a legitimate jihad? Have you got no sense? Saudi Arabia is in this struggle up to its neck, the insurrection in Syria, and therefore the qarn of shaitan is involved in it. Qatar has suddenly risen up as a Zionist state. It is hosting Al Jazeera and the evidence mounts every day that Al Jazeera is a sister of CNN. Every time there is an Arab Spring, an insurrection or a rebellion or something, Al Jazeera is there to add fuel to the fire, to try to ensure that the struggle is successful and the Zionists achieve their objective. So the dust is no longer there in our eyes, and we can see plainly what Al Jazeera is, a Zionist front organization. Qatar was chosen, little Qatar, which yesterday was only taking care of sheep and goats and diving in the sea for pearls, is now hosting the 2022 World Cup. That could not have occurred without Zionist support, unless you are blind and you are taking money and you are taking weapons from Qatar and you want to tell me this is a legitimate jihad? Turkey is a member of NATO, and Turkey as a NATO member supported the insurrection, the armed insurrection in Libya to overthrow the Gaddafi regime. And when they succeeded, the British Prime Minister and the French Prime Minister were the first to fly into Tripoli to congratulate the Zionist success in Libya. And guess who followed them? It was the Turkish Prime Minister, to his eternal shame. To his eternal shame. He flew to Tripoli to congratulate them on their struggle, which had succeeded. And so now NATO is in control of Libya. And this is the same Turkish government which is now sending arms and sending weapons and sending men and financing on behalf of NATO and therefore on behalf of the Zionists, the insurrection in Syria. Since 1980, in the 1980s, Turkey established a military alliance with Israel. And that military alliance for military cooperation has continued from that day to this day. And Zionists around the world support Turkey and will not allow criticisms of Turkey, because they consider Turkey to be an ally of the state of Israel. But then came the flotilla to Gaza, and a high-profile attempt to break the blockade of Gaza. 3 years ago. Malaysia was also involved in that. And the Israeli armed forces responded with a brutal attack in which 7 Turkish nationals were killed. The Turkish government then scaled down their diplomatic relations with Israel 3 years ago, demanded an apology and demanded compensation for the families of those who were killed, and demanded legal action against the soldiers, the men in the Israeli armed forces who did the work of killing. 3 years have passed, and now suddenly Obama goes to Jerusalem, sits down with Netanyahu, cook whatever pilau they cooked, or maybe biryani. And the next thing we hear is that Netanyahu telephones the Turkish Prime Minister and offers a rare apology. Israel never apologizes, no. A rare apology, and offers to pay compensation. And the Turkish Prime Minister graciously decides to drop the cases against the the Israeli armed forces, the legal cases. And so they've restored diplomatic relations at a high level. And the friendship between Turkey and Israel is now restored. And your jihad, your so-called jihad in Syria, is being supported up to its neck by Turkey, which is in friendly relations with Israel, and which has a military alliance with Israel, and which is a member state of NATO. And you cannot recognize that this is a bogus jihad? What more do I need to tell you? Why did Netanyahu call and apologize? Give me a little time and we'll explain that. Turkey also is the inheritor of the Ottoman Empire. And while Turkish Muslims don't like to hear it, it is the truth. The Ottoman Empire acted unjustly in oppressing Eastern Orthodox Christians in Greece, in Bulgaria, in Romania, in Ukraine, waging war after war against them unjustly, enslaving their people, enslaving the women who then became part of the Ottoman harem. The unjust wars against the people of Eastern Christianity, which the Quran refers to as Rome, continued for 500 years, as a consequence of which Greece now hates Islam. The Greek people have hatred in their hearts for Islam. The Bulgarians have hatred in their hearts for Islam. The Russians have hatred in their hearts for Islam. The Ottomans added salt to the wounds when they conquered the capital city of Rome, of Eastern Christian Orthodox, Constantinople. And when they conquered Constantinople, they said, this is the fulfillment of the prophecy of Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam, لَتَفْتَحَنَّ الْقُنْسْتَنْتِنِيَّةِ. You will most certainly conquer Constantinople. No, you're wrong. That prophecy is still to be fulfilled. And I'm planning to write a little book on that, inshallah. The same way that the Ottomans oppressed the people of Eastern Europe, the Christians of Eastern Europe, and did it on behalf of the Zionists, not knowing it, so too has Turkey consistently oppressed the Kurdish people. from day one. You cannot consistently oppress a people and not expect them to respond. If they have responded with terrorism, you started it. You are the cause of it. And this oppression of the Kurdish people by Turkey invalidates any claim of the Kurdish people, of the Turkish people, to be able to sponsor a legitimate jihad. Finally, I don't know whether you know of it, those of you who are there in Syria, waging the so-called jihad. Are you aware who is your ally who is also fighting with you? It's not just Libya and Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Turkey. You have another friend who is fighting with you against the same regime. That friend sent the aircraft to bomb Syria. I'm talking about Israel. Are you happy to be in the Israeli camp? To have Israel as your ally in this so-called jihad? Israel attacked Syria. It must have been about a month or 2 months ago. The methodology of your struggle is also wrong, with acts of terrorism and killing people because you say they are wajibul qatl. Killing them in a masjid, a sheikh who is delivering a sermon, and this invalidates your claim to be a valid jihad. The Zionists want to break the resistance front. That's why they attacked Libya and now Syria and then Iran. The Zionists want to break the resistance front and replace it with what? Not pro-Zionist regimes. What they want in Syria is an Islamic government. They want an Islamic government which will claim that they're restoring the Khilafah in Syria. And that this Islamic government will declare we're waging jihad against Israel. That we're going to liberate the Holy Land. And as you get a string of Islamic governments and the rhetoric begins to rise all around Israel. I made this analysis about 12 years ago in a lecture in Sydney. A domino effect. They'll fall one by one and Islamic governments will emerge. Why does Israel smile when Ikhwan al-Muslimun takes over in Egypt? Why does Israel smile when you now have a so-called Islamic government in Libya? Israel is smiling because Israel will tomorrow be able to claim with some justification that Islam is rising now from its slumber, and Islam poses the greatest of all threats to the state of Israel. The Muslims are going to wipe us off the map, and if we don't do something, we'll be finished. And so Israel is creating what is called casus bellum, a justification for waging the great wars that Israel has already planned to wage. In order for Israel to rule the world, Israel must rule the Arabs. In order for Israel to rule the Arabs, she needs not only to enslave them economically and monetarily, but also military occupation. Israel has to wage big wars. And Israel does not want to wage her big wars while yet appearing to be an aggressor. And so the Arab Spring is meant to produce a strategic environment of Islamic governments all around Israel that will justify an Israel war, a great war of Israel launched against the Arabs. We now come to the most important part of our talk tonight, and that is that they have now tried everything they could try for 2 years, and the Syrian regime has not fallen. No. The reason why the Syrian regime has not fallen and the Libyan regime fell is because NATO cannot attack with no fly and so on. Because Russia has blocked it, and China has blocked it in the Security Council. Why did Russia and China vote in favor on Libya? It's a mysterious question. I have an answer, but I don't know whether I'm right or wrong. Very mysterious. But on on Syria, Putin has put his foot down, and they're not budging. And so NATO cannot intervene militarily. And that is why the Syrian regime has survived. So what do you do after 2 years? I hope I'm wrong. Because if I'm right, we're in plenty trouble. I believe that they have now decided the time has come for Turkey to attack Syria. Of course, there will have to be some false flag terrorism as usual to justify the attack. Maybe a chemical attack. And they say, well, Syria's chemical weapons are now out of control of the Syrian government. Or some other kind of a false flag act of terrorism, which will justify a Turkish attack on Syria. As soon as Turkey attacks Syria, it will not be long, I believe, before Russia will intervene. And if Russia intervenes, then there have been those who have been writing to me for 2 years now and saying to me, Sheikh, Jerusalem in the Quran told us that when Dajjal was in a day which was like a year, during that time, not the total amount of time, no, during that time Britain emerged as the ruling state and the world experienced Pax Britannica. And we agree with you, Sheikh. And then came Dajjal's day like a month. That's the hadith, Sahih Muslim. And during that time, the United States emerged as the second ruling state in the world, and the world experienced Pax Americana. But it's not Pax, it's war. And they've been saying to me, Sheikh, a day like a month has ended, and a day like a week has already begun, and Israel is already ruling the world. And I have refrained so far from making such a statement. But I have to say that if Turkey attacks Syria, then Israel is going to come out from behind the hijab, and Israel is going to participate full-fledged in the war. Russia is going to enter. Then I'll have to concede that a day which is like a week has now commenced. How long it's going to last, I don't know. When a day which is like a week has ended, only then will Dajjal appear in our world of space and time, and you see him as a human being. And so look in the coming days and coming weeks for a false flag act attack of terrorism, maybe chemical. Look for a Turkish attack on Syria. Look for Israel then joining in the war, and that is why they had to do the apology. That is the reason for the apology. And then look for Russian intervention. If Russia intervenes, then I have something more to say. The Quran speaks of Rome. And Nabi Muhammad ﷺ also speaks about Rome, and that we Muslims will make an alliance with Rome. What is proper methodology if we want to identify Rome? Proper methodology is you go first to the Quran. That's proper methodology. And after going to the Quran, then you go to the Hadith. And after going to the Quran and Hadith, then you go to data outside of the Quran and Hadith, and you'll accept it to the extent that it is in harmony with the Quran and Hadith. When we go to the Quran, we find a whole surah of the Quran named Surah Rum. And in that surah Allah says, غُلِبَتِ الرُّومِ. Rome has been defeated. وَهُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ غَلَبِهِمْ سَيَغْلِبُونَ. But they, فِي بِدْعَ سِنِينَ. But they will, within a short period of time, reverse the tide and defeat the enemy and be victorious. When this verse of the Quran was revealed, all the companions of the Prophet ﷺ and the Prophet himself sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wasallam all recognized that the Quran was speaking of the Byzantine Christian Empire, not about Washington and London and Paris and NATO. That the Persian Empire defeated Byzantium, and the kuffar of Makkah, the mushrikun, were all celebrating because Byzantium worship, a book that came down from Allah, and so too this new religion in Makkah. So there was an affinity. And we were sad when we heard the news of the defeat of the Byzantine. But when the verse came down, then Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu ta'ala anhu made a bet with Ka'b bin Ubay, I think was his name. A bet that the Byzantines are going to defeat the Persians within 3 years. And when the Prophet ﷺ heard about the bet, he said, "No, Abu Bakr, you got to increase it. Because it doesn't mean 3, it means between 3 and 9. Between 3 and 9. Bid'a sinin." And so Abu Bakr Siddiq then modified the bet. And within those 9 years, the Byzantine Empire defeated the Persians. And so Rome was victorious. Rome in the Quran is Eastern Christian Byzantine, Orthodox Christian. That's Rome in the Quran. And so when the Prophet ﷺ said that you'll make an alliance with Rome, he's not talking about Washington and London. When the Ottomans defeated the Byzantine and captured Constantinople, not only did they take the cathedral, which is the heart of the church, Hagia Sophia, and convert it into a masjid, and that was a very shameful thing that they did. But they did something else, very cleverly. The Sultan declared that I am now Rome. I am the head of Rome. And the church, the patriarch, was allowed to remain in Constantinople on the condition that he must be a Turkish national. And the Patriarch of the Eastern Orthodox Christians have remained in Constantinople to this day, operating under the heel of the Turkish government. The rest of the Orthodox Christians of Europe didn't accept that. No. The Russians never accepted that. And the Russians say, no, Rome has now moved to Moscow. But the Ottomans very cleverly created a new Vatican in Constantinople. Rome today is Russia. But my critics never fail to criticize me in that declaration. Rome today is Russia. And there is one way of interpreting the Quran, that an event described in the Quran may not be confined to only one historical instance. I did this analysis with the sacrifice of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And I said, although he did a sacrifice at that time, I said the sacrifice is still to come, the slaughter of the Arabs. Similarly, I'm suggesting tonight that Ghulibatir Rum means that when Russia enters into the war against Turkey, NATO will defeat Russia. But within 9 years, Russia will overcome, and history will repeat itself. And after that, which is the Malhama, will come the conquest of Constantinople. You have to be on the right side of history at this time. And so I end this book explaining Israel's mysterious imperial agenda, helps you to understand the subject. We have to end now because there's another program to take place in this masjid. I feel sad about it because I wanted to do some more on this topic tonight. But this is why we had that Israeli apology at this time, because I believe this is what's going to happen now. And it is time for us to recognize we are now living in a very momentous page in the book of history. Succeeding generations will look back to this moment. And so it is important for us to understand what is happening in the world today. We pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala may bless those amongst us who will now return to the Quran and return to Nabi Muhammad alayhi salatu wasalam to understand the world in which we now live. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. Do we have time for question and answer or no time?
للفردوس آلا ولا أقوى على نار الجحيم الله فهب لي التوبة واغفر ذنوبي فإنك غافر الذنب العظيم إلهي لست للفردوس أهلا ولا أقوى على نار الجحيم الله فهب لي توبة واغفر ذنوبي